All right, let's talk about the Chicago Bears, who enter with a really fascinating offseason. Now, they're consistently offseason champions. They're in an offseason dynasty right now of how often we could declare them offseason champions. And they've already had a great move as well with Ben Johnson, who on paper should be very good. At least in my opinion, I think it's a great signing, getting him as the head coach. But of course, they've had many things that work well on paper, but don't actually result in them getting into the playoffs and going on deep playoff runs. How can that change? How can they get back to, I can say get back to. They've had good, obviously, historic franchise. How can they get back to being good as opposed to just looking good on paper and then struggling once things happen? Well, first, let's talk about where they're currently at. Where were they at last year? If you look at their Pro Football Focus grades in terms of where they ranked in specific positional categories, one is going to jump out at you right away, which is the strength of this team, pass blocking. You're sitting here saying, okay, what is PFF smoking? What's going on? Why did they say that? I got to say, well, I don't know about 8th best. I am much closer to them than the general public would be, because I made a whole video talking about how the offensive line, it's just kind of what happens is if nothing's open or if the quarterback holds on to the ball too long, even if the offensive line blocks well, people will blame the offensive line if a play results in a sack, unless it's like one of those ridiculous 10-second plays. Usually, if it's a 4-second sack, people will still blame the offensive line. That's just kind of how our brains work, because that's what we're watching when we're watching a football game, right? It makes sense. But you look at 4 out of the 5 offensive linemen. Coleman Shelton, who we'll talk about a little bit more at the center position, is good. Matt Pryor and Tevin Jenkins have been good guards. Darnell Wright was a good tackle. And Braxton Jones, I would say, has been solid as well. Now, they did struggle with depth. Anytime someone who had to come in that wasn't a starter, I think that's where they did kind of struggle. Like Larry Borum was definitely not ideal, and that kind of hurt it. But really, the offensive line issues, it's not Detroit, and we'll see if, Ben Johnson has to try new things. But I would not go into this offseason saying we have to build the trenches. I would go into this offseason saying we have to build the receiving core and get the ball out of Caleb Williams' hands quicker. That's how I would view this. The receiving core was 27th ranked in football last year. Passing was 28th ranked. Caleb Williams did not look great out there. Took too many sacks, which I believe that is still factored into passing grades. So that's what they have to fix. Run blocking was all right at 15th. Running, maybe according to PFF, they could use a back. And then the defense, PFF wasn't as crazy about, but did have the 10th ranked coverage. Usually, if you have a good coverage unit, you can deal with a mediocre run defense and pass rush. And that's what, according to PFF, they did last year. We'll see if they make any moves to bolster that. But again, we can agree or disagree about the pass blocking stuff. But I do think, as a general rule, people love to say the offensive line stinks. But who do you replace then? Then it becomes a question, right? If you look at their cap space coming up, here's the good news, is you got money to spend. You do. You have money to spend on players if you want to. $62 million and then $132 million. The rookie contract, right? It's a beautiful thing. You usually get a lot of money. They do have a couple of free agents that they're going to have to think about. You have Tevin Jenkins, you have Keenan Allen, and you have Coleman Shelton, the guy who I brought up earlier, the center who's pretty good. Tevin Jenkins is pretty good. Quite frankly, the number next to them is how many millions they're projected to get. If it's $18 million for Jenkins and Shelton, let's bring those guys back. I actually wouldn't hate just the 5 starting offensive linemen. Again, that'll be a hot take for a lot of people, but that's just how I view it. I've done a lot of evaluation on Caleb Williams' offensive line tape. I really do feel like it is a Williams issue more than an offensive line issue. So you need Ben Johnson and his team to coach Williams up, get the ball out of his hands quicker, and one thing that helps is, can you just get a receiver who can get open more and make it easier for Caleb Williams to get the ball out of his hands, right? Another way to do that is they do actually have more draft capital than than a usual team does, because they still have a draft pick from the Bryce Young trade, which we were talking about as one of the all-time worst trades ever for the Panthers. Now the Panthers don't feel so bad about it, but because Bryce Young started playing a lot better. But the Bears do have an extra, they have the Panthers' second-round pick, which is a great pick. So the Bears are going to be picking 3 times in the top 50. That's very good. They don't have a 4th-round pick, but they do also have 2 7s. So they got good draft capital as well. And that's just kind of where the Bears are at right now. And again, I'm fascinated by this because Ben Johnson, okay, we saw him with Detroit. Detroit had a very clear identity. We want to be this physical team with, great offensive line, be able to kind of smack you in the mouth, bite your kneecaps, so to speak. That was their philosophy. Ben Johnson, coming from that system, does he do the same thing? And does he say, you know what? Sure, Tevin Jenkins, Cole Michelton, you guys are good players, but I want some great offensive linemen. Sure, these tackles are all right. I want great tackles. Let me go out and try and do that. Maybe that's his mindset. To me, I would focus more on the receiving core, which, despite the big names, just did not produce last year. Try to get them into be a better spot. And to me, as well, I think the defense should still be all right this year. I think my biggest concern I would have, and my biggest focus if I'm the Bears, is completely about what are things that Caleb Williams needs to improve upon. How can we help him improve that? And I think receiving core is a great issue because one of the biggest issues is he holds on to the ball for too long. Getting him and to be honest, a lot of times when I'm watching Chicago Bears tape, I'm like, yeah, he's holding on to the ball for too long, but like, he can't throw it here. I kind of get why he's holding on to the ball for too long. If you kind of get him more in the, okay, I got to get rid of the football quickly. Getting rid of the football quickly works, well, then he'll do it more. When he gets rid of the football quickly and it doesn't work, well, that's an issue. And a lot of people have, again, the quarterback's always going to get the blame, and he deserves some of the blame for it. He does. But there's ways to fix it as well. There's ways to fix the situation. Williams doesn't need a better offensive line. Williams needs guys to get the ball to quickly, and that's part of why the Ben Johnson signing, I think, works so well, is because he did such a good job of scheming guys open for the Detroit Lions. If he can do that for Caleb Williams, that's how you can start to see Caleb Williams look like the first overall pick and generational talent that he got talked about. There's a generational talent every 3 years, but he was still, he was a really good prospect. I'll still say he had the highest grade that I have ever given a player in the when I do my draft grade things that I just do on my notes. I do it differently than everyone else does. But he was he's gotten the highest score I've ever given a player, period. I factor in positional value though, so that's part of it. But I still think there is talent here. Yes, it didn't go great, but you got to do what you can to try and fix it. And you know what? If it doesn't work, well, then you've built a good situation for the next guy, and you can go from there. That's kind of how you have to view these things. To me, I'm not trading for Myles Garrett. That's not what I'm doing. I'm not going out and trying to help the defense more. Sure, that would be cool. Can't neglect it. But Caleb Williams is priority number one. That's what they have to focus on. At least that's how I see all of this. What do you think? What would you do if you're the Chicago Bears? They are an interesting team. Do you disagree? Do you think I'm maybe downplaying the offensive line issues too much? I'm not saying you couldn't improve, just to be clear. But what do you think? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Always love hearing from y'all. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.